Hello, it's the end. It's the last episode of this podcast before I put it on hiatus, and it could be a pretty damn long hiatus. I can't even promise that I'll be back. So, sorry to break your heart. This is the 100th episode. We're not focusing on any particular book. It's just a party, like we did for the 50th episode. It's a bit indulgent, really, because if you think about it, that means 2% of the show has been parties, not actually looking at a particular book. But I can assure you that the discussion in this episode does stick quite closely to literature, about maybe 50% literature and general commentary, and then the other half, and publishing of literature, and translation of literature, obviously, and then the other half is just good old reminiscing about the show. I haven't had a massive output, really. The show's been running almost exactly 5 years, and we hit 100 episodes, so 20 a year, which is more than one a month, but not a lot more than one a month. But they are fairly sophisticated episodes. But anyway, you'll hear me say pretty much exactly the same thing on the show. So I guess, I don't know whether here in the intro or the outro to get all emotional. You won't really hear me get emotional in the party. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just very repressed or something without even knowing it. But yeah, it's been mad. A really mad experience running this show. When I started it, I did not have any idea about where it was going to take me, who I was going to end up talking to, or indeed how much knowledge I'd end up harvesting about the wonderful world of Chinese literature. I've even learned things about, like, the, let's just say, Chinese culture or history that I didn't learn while living there. In fact, I regret, while having lived in China, not having learned more about literature and the authors, because I did learn the history, for sure. But I wish I had made more of an effort to seek out translated Chinese fiction while living there. It would have enriched my experience. I could have done literary tours of like Shanghai and stuff. But c'est la vie, c'est la vie. It's in the past, and this show is pretty much now in the past as well. But there is a plan to return to it, like I said. So thank you, listener, for listening. I think at the end of the outro, I'm going to just say exactly the same thing. And just remember that if you've not listened to every episode, all 100 are staying up. I'm not taking them down. They're staying up online for posterity. I may be moving the hosting. They're currently hosted on rss.com, which charges me once a year. I might move it to like Spotify or some other free platform, just so that I'm not forking out money for something I don't work on every year. But yeah, the show will stay online. The feed should stay unbroken, so you can expect the podcast feed to stay alive. If you're listening if you found this episode and the feed is gone, or if you come back to the show and the feed is gone, look to YouTube, because I also put the episodes on YouTube, and that's free. So they should be on YouTube for posterity as well, hopefully. So yeah, it's always there for you. You can always come back to it. I'll also, I'm not going anywhere online. I'm not planning to quit social media. So you can always reach out via the old social media channels. Twitter is @AngusLikesWords. The show's Instagram is @Trchfic, TRCHFIC. I'm probably going to keep posting crap on its stories, but also if you want to speak to me on Instagram, I'm @AngusSporin, Sporin being the thing on the front of a kilt, Angus being my name. There's the show's Discord. I am sort of expecting that to go dormant, but I'm not going to delete it. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, don't worry, I've unpublished the Patreon, so you won't be forking out any more money on that. So no worries there. The show's Buy Me a Coffee is going to stay up. But, I won't be producing or working on the show, so no need to go there at all. I think in the party you're going to hear me being asked, or you're going to hear people asking me what I'm going to be doing after the hiatus. And I don't think I actually gave a clear answer. But essentially, there's a few things I wanted to work on. I may have said this in past episodes. I want to do more formal study of Chinese. I want to finally get my driver's license, because I'm coming up on 31 years old now. And I'm going to focus on my writing and try and get more short stories and essays published, and maybe even rally past short stories that have been successful into a collection. But I'll need some more wins there first. So if you're interested in any of that, just keep an eye on my Twitter and stuff like that. Okay, I'm not going to do a news segment this time, just because I want a break, because it's a party episode. So no news segment, straight into the party. Hope you enjoy listening to me and former podcast guests, listeners, and many of whom, if not all, I'm happy to call my friends. Just chat, shoot the shit, as they say in America. And I don't know what the Chinese translation of shoot the shit is, but that's what we do. So enjoy. Right, so it's the final episode of this podcast, the Translated Chinese Fiction Podcast. There's no book for this episode. I'm just doing what we did in episode 50, just throwing a little party to give myself a pat on the back, basically. So at present, we have, excluding myself, 5 people here. I'm letting in a 6th person right now. That I'm going to have to time this so that she hears me say it. The 6th person I've just brought in is Lihyla Heward. So here we have, and it's probably more people are going to jump in as I'm listing. Listener Scarlett, multiple pod guest Dylan, one-time pod guest, or no, two-time. My memory's not good. Past guest Jenna, past guest Hyla, multiple past guest Michelle, multiple past guest Nikki Harmon. So a lot of the gangs here. Great to have you all here. For the other people, the invisible people, the listeners, would you like to say hi, say a bit about yourselves?
Woo! Congratulations,
Also,
Angus!
yes,
Episode 100!
yeah, thank you.
Woo!
It's nice to be throwing a party before vanishing from the RSS feed. Yeah, does anyone want to introduce himself? I mean, I know who you are, but
I'll
listeners might want
introduce
to
my
know. Yeah,
I'll introduce, yeah. So I'm Nikki Harmon. I had the pleasure of being your guest at least once. My memory is terrible too, so maybe
maybe
more.
like 2 or 3, I
And
think.
I just, oh right, okay, 2 or 3. I just think that it was such a great initiative, and there's really been nothing like it. So I hope other people will take up the banner and run with it, if you do run with a banner, because it's so nice to have an opportunity to talk at length and in a leisurely way about the book you've been translating or your favorite author. And so I've been really happy to be part of it.
Amen. And Nadia, past guest Nadia Ho has arrived as well. Does anyone else want to say hi to the listeners?
Yeah, I would like to chime in. Congratulations. This is an amazing achievement, I think. I was actually in Shanghai just a few weeks ago, and I met up with another of your past guests, and we were talking about how great 100 episodes is. I remember being there basically from the beginning because as you and I have spoken, I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Lihyla Heward, and I've been a guest twice. But you and I have spoken, and I reached out to you when you had barely started the podcast, and I was like, oh, I had this idea, but I'm so glad it's already out there in the world, and like I just think it's so exciting that you're doing it. And so yeah, longtime listener, and I'm so excited for what you've done. And yeah, it's a great resource as well, so thank you and congratulations on this.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that was when I was back in my flat in Edinburgh that we spoke, and I didn't know it, only knew your website, didn't know your face. Oh, Piotr is here. Wonderful. I promise I'm not just trying to solicit praise, but does anyone else want to introduce themselves to the listeners?
Yeah, I can chime in. Hi everyone, I'm Jenna Tang, and I translate from Taiwanese literature, and it's been such a pleasure working with you, Angus, and to see other episodes coming out from some of you. I really enjoyed the 100 episodes. Like, I have to admit, I didn't listen to every single one of them, but I've been pretty involved still, and I've been enjoying listening to many episodes among the 100 on my train rides and my flights and so many other travels. So there's so many episodes like that's talking about literature that I feel like it's embedded with a lot of my journeys, and I really appreciate that you're doing this for the community and for bringing so many good literature and like good titles that I maybe didn't know before I listened to your episode. And I agree with others, like this is such a great achievement and congratulations for hitting episode 100. It's been such a pleasure like going back and forth and taking part in some of your episodes.
Yeah, and it was fantastic having you on them as well. Anyone else want to say hi to the listeners?
I'll say hi. Hey, it's Dylan. I've been on the show. I was on the last episode, in fact, and one of the early ones, one of the middle ones, I think.
Yeah.
And since we're offering praise, I'll give some too. So many times this kind of initiative would come from either it would have some money behind it from some sort of a cultural affairs body or academia. And that's why I think your project was really refreshing, Angus, because it was about the joy of reading these books and discovering them together. And yeah, I mean, of course, like everyone said, it's unbelievable what you did. Because so often we translate these books and they go out into the wilderness and nobody ever acknowledges them. These brilliant books that people have put hours and hours and hours of labor into. And maybe it got a little review on Goodreads or something like that. But it's so much fun to talk about these books and to acknowledge the people who worked on them.
Yeah, I feel kind of the same. Some of the books we've covered on the show, I think, have genuinely been a bit obscure, or in translation they're obscure, but maybe they're really quite big in Chinese language. Like I think Taipei People felt like a bit of an example of that. It was quite nicely put together, but I'm not sure how much that circulated outside of academic libraries. So yeah, I agree. That's what it's all about, is just enjoying the books, getting the word out, and so that when someone searches the author's name on their podcast app, something comes up that's more than like 2 minutes long. Because even for like Mo Yan, I think I was pretty surprised how little there was for a guy like that in a podcast index. I did have one listener, and actually an early show guest who I won't name, who said something like, "So your project has ended. Has it? Was it? It must be because you feel it's been a big enough financial success, or is it no longer making you money?" And I was like, "What? How do you think it's a commercial operation? Why would you think that?" But yeah, if I do relaunch it, maybe I will go seeking a wealthy benefactor. But
Are you going to tell us how much money you made off of the project now? Are you going to admit the thousands you've earned?
the spreadsheet doesn't exist. I do think it's a net profit. I think
That's
the
good.
Patreon money and that and etc. has outweighed the hosting fees, but I'm going to keep the website up and turn off the Patreon. So over time, unless I maybe like migrate it all to Patreon and keep some stuff free, find some free way to do it, then eventually the bank it'll go into the red. But it's a small amount every month, so that's fine. There was something else I was going to say about that, but I don't remember what it is. But yeah, basically it has technically, oh yes, it technically has run a profit. But if you assume I'm working minimum wage and subtract all the hours I've put in, it's definitely on a loss.
Definitely.
The main cost has been time, not really mental effort, really, because a lot of the thing that sinks the time is the editing, and that's not really brain work. That's just getting through it. Well, there's two more people here I should let in. Does anyone else want to say hi to the listeners, or just make a statement?
Oh, go ahead, Scarlett.
Oh, thank you. Hi everyone. My name's Zhang Scarlett. I'm from Suzhou, China. And I do some English and Chinese translations and more sci-fi stuff and writing and music related and lots more. I'm a member of the Babel of Chinese Sci-Fi, previously known as London Chinese Science Fiction Group, which we were in episode 72. And I was also in the episode 50s party, I think in 2021. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm like admire Angus doing this work so much, like thinking of how much effort he's been putting on. And I can't even imagine like how much time would you spend to do all the editing for the 2-3 hour long shows. I really, yeah, and it's been benefited me so much over the years. I learned a lot, and also many episodes they like remind me the books growing up I've been reading, and it's really interesting to see how Western people see them from a different perspective. And also, I want to say, Nikki, I really want to taste your apple juice. I remember, I think it was her first episode, she said she was doing some apple juice, and Angus said that's a very English thing. So I really want to know what type of apple you're using.
Was it cider, maybe, Nikki?
No, it was a little apple orchard we had, and my husband turned out to be allergic to apple trees. So we had to basically leave it with me, and I couldn't be bothered to make the cider. So I just
Right.
used to make the apple juice. So it was kind of a mixture of cooking apples and sweet apples and cider apples. And then I used to deep freeze it. And I could not possibly tell you the names of any of the varieties because, like, it just went right out of my memory. But it was fun while it lasted.
That's funny because I've had favorite podcasts where I remember like these really obscure conversations that lasted on old episodes for like 30 seconds. And there are bits like that on this show that I recall, but I had totally forgotten about Nikki's apple juice anecdote. So I think that shows you're an obsessive listener, Scarlett. That's good.
And also, I am so pleased and surprised to find Dylan lived in my hometown for some time.
Shujo, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Nice.
Oh, thank you.
I see Daniel and Fiona have arrived. Piotr's here as well. So it's Nadia. Nice to see you all. Does anyone else want to say hi or just be a silent or stealthy presence?
Yeah, we'll just quickly jump in to say hi. Hi, everyone.
Peter.
I'm Peter. I was on the show episode 77, I guess. And I can see some of my heroes here. I mean, people that I am looking up to. Hi, Dylan. Probably never met before. Hi, Nikki. And some of the friends. And what you did here is not only you talked about books, but you gathered a community of maybe not like-minded people, but driven by the same not caring for money kind of a drive to spread the word about this tremendous literature. I do my PhD in literature studies, but I am nowhere close to how much you've read of Chinese literature. So it's sad to see you go, but you know it's a big heritage you're leaving behind. So let the succession game begin.
Yeah, I'm sure someone will launch a better show. There is the main rival is still going, the Chinese literature podcast, although they're shorter form, and one of their two guys has quit, so that's a solo operation. And they sometimes do he sometimes does interviews. But yeah,
It's a totally different show, man.
It's a different beast. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a guy messaged me on Discord just a few days ago saying he'd been a long, and maybe prompted by the fact that we're wrapping up, been a long time listener of the show. I don't know how he started listening, but he decided to replan his life based on having become interested in translated Chinese books, and he's gone to study Chinese language, I guess, at the University of Manchester, of which I'm a staff member. So I've said to him, come have lunch with me, and hopefully I haven't scared him away. But yeah, if just one person replanned their life, then that's a pleasing amount of power over the universe. So, but hopefully it's had a positive effect on other people as well. Does anyone else who's not introduced themselves want to do so? Michelle.
I've already spoken a few times, so I should probably clarify. I'm Michelle.
Who's the voice?
The person behind the voice. I'm Michelle Dieter, Chinese to English translator and interpreter, born in California, now based in Manchester, pretty close to Angus's house. And yeah, so grateful to have the podcast. I think in terms of changing the universe, the book that I translated and talked about with you, the most recent one, Bad Kids, was shortlisted for a prize. And I don't think that wouldn't have been possible. Like, people wouldn't even know the book existed without a little bit of promotion, a little bit of gentle nudges. So I'm really pleased that I got to be featured on the show. I'm really pleased that you went through with this. And I'm still like in denial. I think this is still a pause and the podcast will come back.
I think it is a pause. I just can't promise it will be a very short pause.
Fair enough.
And I can't promise it will be a pause because who knows what's coming. But yeah. Anyone else want to say? Daniel's raising his hand. Daniel, where are you?
I'll do it, but I apologize. We got a lot of bad background noise in the back. If that's gonna ruin the recording. Do you get background noise right now? my end?
You're a little fuzzy, but there is no background noise.
Okay.
So I'm guessing it's doing a lot of
Okay.
cancelling.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm in the BFI at the moment.
Ooh.
There's a film screening, one or two, which and then a subsequent panel, which I'm slightly late for. But, anyway, apologies for showing up late. My name is Daniel. I am the production and marketing manager for Signers Books. And yeah, well, thank you so much, Angus, for the hours and hours of entertainment you've provided us over the past God knows how many years. This is a
4. No,
this is a
technically
COVID.
5.
Post,
Technically 5.
is it pre or post COVID? No, because it must be pre. I remember meeting you in
I
London.
I did my master's 2018-19, and I know I started this one start of 2019. So pretty much bang on 5 years, actually.
Amazing. Well, congratulations, buddy. I am 100% sure that it's going to be a pause, and I'm sure we'll be ending up working together at some point anyway. The world's too small for that. So, but in the meantime, enjoy a much earned rest, I think, and can't wait for your next project.
Yeah, no, you're never going to escape me, Daniel. Don't worry. Does anyone else want to say hi? Are we good?
I'll say
Okay.
a quick hi.
Oh,
Can
hello,
you?
Nadia.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm not. It's not your audio. It's just my voice. I just woke up. I'm in New York. It's early for Saturday morning. I'm Nadia. I appear once in the episode for Taipei People by Samuel, just because I'm from Taipei, and I just wanted to say it's incredible job that you did, and translation jobs came to me a lot in my life just because I can write in both languages. I never wanted to become a translator, but it's amazing how everyone admits it's a very tough job and no one wants to pay more. But also being able to work as a translator or interpreter gives me access to all the secrets or really interesting gray area, especially those. So I usually translate outside of the literature department, in the business and legal sector. So that's where the raw language is coming from. So just wanted to share it out there with all the translators here. And I actually have a lot of questions to ask the host because you tend to be the one to ask people questions in your shows, and I don't know if anyone has asked you like how do you have any behind stories to share in this long history of 100 episodes, and what are you gonna do after this?
What do you mean by behind stories? Like why I
How did you
started the
find
show?
these people? How did you
Behind the
Oh,
scenes, behind the scenes.
behind the
How does it
scenes.
yeah,
work?
behind the scenes, like how did you get your ideas?
Well, I guess picking the contents, like the books, is just reading things I'm interested in reading with a little bit of also trying to cover some bases. So for example, I think I've possibly you said it as an example before. I really like Chinese sci-fi and sci-fi generally, but especially Chinese sci-fi. So I've covered a disproportionate amount of that on the show, definitely. But that also gets a lot of downloads. And then there's other things I don't really care about as much. Web novels, Xianxia, for example, or even wuxia. It's good, but it's maybe not for me. But that's been on the show because it would feel weird if I didn't cover such a big thing in Chinese lit and pop culture. The pain is reading books just because it takes a long time unless you're willing to forego all your other leisure activities, like playing on the Xbox, for example. So sometimes I pick things because they're short. As for finding guests, it's been easier than I expected. I've found messaging someone on Twitter, or if you can get an email, emailing them, the hit rate's quite high. A few have fallen into my lap, like a publisher wanted to promote their book, and I guess Google search engine led them to my show or something, maybe word of mouth. Sometimes a friend has recommended someone. So like, I think for Type A people, it was quite interesting. Dylan, quite a long time before I did the episode, said that would be an interesting book for you to do. Maybe you could try Mike Fu. You've talked to him before about Sanmao. He might like to talk about that book. So I messaged Mike. Mike declined, but said, here's someone else who might be able to talk about that. And he put me in touch with Nadia. So things like that as well. People putting me in touch with other people. And I think another one that really helped was when I went along to a few of the Leeds symposiums about different types of Chinese lit, because going to one made me WeChat friends with two huge Chinese sci-fi writers, Chen Qiufan and Xia, and they were both so happy to speak. So I think if so many guests hadn't been so eager to talk about things they translated, or just even if they didn't translate it, stories they enjoyed, then a lot of it wouldn't have been possible. I think the fact it was so easy to get guests is what turned it into an interview show. Because when I started it, the plan wasn't really to do interviews. It was to sort of ramble, form a bit of a plan, follow the plan, and just monologue, occasionally pausing recording and catching my breath, hitting record and starting again, and then tidying it up with the edits. But I decided having guests made for more interesting listening, and meant I didn't have to like talk out of my ass quite so much, learn a bit more, and then I guess get more downloads as well, because the guest might show up in people's search results if they search, for example, Ken Leo, and the guests might share the episodes with their friends. And the amazing side effect has been getting to know some people. Some people have done an episode and then I haven't pestered them again. Ken Leo being an example. He's a busy guy, and I think he likes to keep things somewhat business-like. But then a lot of you people here have stayed in touch one way or another, and that's been really nice.
In all fairness, some people reached out to Angus, me being one example, and because for a while, or maybe you kept doing that, you were very open to suggestions from your audience on Instagram. So at some point, I just felt that you kept on missing on Yin K. So the word got spread at some point. So I believe that I'm not the only one who just wanted to be on the show and do something, rather than wait for Angus to be invited by Angus.
Yeah, I think another very minor thing is the reason I've always had some, no boring guests on the show is I haven't held myself to a schedule. A lot of people doing a podcast, there needs to be a new episode up every 2 weeks or every month. And I have a lot of respect for people that manage to stick to that, because I couldn't stick to that. I haven't the willpower to sustain that for very long. And the episodes I do are complicated enough that it would be a real pain. And I wouldn't want to do like 20-minute long episodes. I want them to be quite meaty. But that's meant if I wanted to take my time to wait for, Ken Leo or someone, and go according to his schedule, I just do that. And that's why there's only been 100 episodes over 5 years, 20 a year. But the pandemic helped. If we hadn't had the pandemic, it would have taken longer to get to 100 for sure.
Can I just,
Yeah.
That was never obvious to me though, by the way. It was never obvious that it was a large or inconsistent space between episodes. So good job there, I guess.
It was, yeah, it averaged out to be maybe once every 3 weeks, with a few longer breaks where I needed to finish a dissertation or see people over Christmas or go on a holiday. But yeah, it was in a very broad sense, yeah, about maybe once every 2 weeks early on, and then as I got busier, got a dog, a bit less frequent. And I could still keep it up, but I think it was getting in the way of doing some other things. So now I'm putting those things in the front. I'm also going to open my beer now. I'm waiting to do this for a while. Cheers. Is that a soft drink, Daniel?
It's a ginger beer. I figure I shouldn't go I shouldn't go into a panel discussion absolutely smash. I think that would be a bad idea.
No, just mildly lubricated would be sufficient.
And I got a cider here as well. I
Oh.
bought it specifically to celebrate this as well. So
Cheers. Are you 1 hour ahead of me, Lila, or
yes,
2?
I am.
Okay,
One.
that's still a bit rebellious.
Just a little. I bought it out by the I live in Malta, so today's a gorgeous day, and I bought it by the sea at this little kiosk. So
So I'm going to go to my first bullet point after introduce yourself. So we'd mentioned the show's been going for 5 years. Seems to me like stuff coming out translated from Chinese has really picked up since then. So I was wondering if anyone's got any specific like books that have come out, translated Chinese books that have come out in the last 5 years that you think are really noteworthy. And of course, if it's something you translated yourself, it still counts. But just generally, anything that's really leaped out at you. I mean, I don't actually have one I'd rattle off at the top of my head. It does seem like sci-fi ended up available in English has become more than just the three-body problem. And it sort of seems like literary books seem to be marketed a bit more as being literature first, Chinese literature second, or they're maybe about being from a specific region of China, like the Northeast, rather than the entire massive country. But I can't think of any single books off the top of my head. Does anyone have any thoughts? I mean, Daniel, you've been I can't think of the right verb. You've been dispersing some of these books in the world yourself.
I mean, obviously, not to toot our own horn. I think the production played a large part of this with your production days that silence. But the field has gotten to a better state than it was 5 years ago. Like 5 years ago, no one could reliably get books to market. No one could reliably get like even to get books to market. There's like there's what is it like? There's just limited amount of market manuals you could market a book from, right? But nowadays, like it seems like people are at least accepting of books that are maybe like a little bit not just like stuff you've heard about China, stuff you haven't heard about China, which is an interesting thing. I think in terms of people who've done well, Yan Ge, I think did really well. I think the past 5 years, I think Jin Yong surprised me. Personally, I'm not sure if anyone else. It's just how well Jin Yong, because A Hero Reborn came out 2018? I want to say. Does anyone know?
Round about then, because the first one was newish when I started my podcast, I think.
Yeah, and right now the first 3 books of that series is now all translated, and I believe Mikla is picking up everything else she's done. So it's been an interesting journey, and it's an interesting time to be in this space because there's just so much to say, it's a little time to say it, you know? And you played a large part in that discussion, in making that discussion happen. Because like as far as I know, like when you first started Chinese literature, like Lee Moore's podcast hasn't even taken off yet, and all the audio content that you get on mostly history content and things like that. Nothing really kind of on contemporary literature. So it still is a refreshing breath of fresh air. And I can't wait to see who picks up the mantle next. Hopefully you, definitely.
Well, I'm glad you think it's me that's behind all of this. I'm not so sure, but maybe my interest doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a sign. It's just one part of an increasing interest in these sorts of books. Does anyone else want to underline one book or a trend they've seen in the last few years?
So I want to say I've sort of been I sort of follow translators now, and Jeremy Tiang has put out some of the most exciting books of the last, like the period we're talking about, like The Wedding Party by Liu Xinwu, and a really exciting book by Shuang Xue Tao, which was sort of the only option to get like the Dongbei new wave stuff in English. A book called Rouge Street was really exciting to me. And he's also translated Zhang Yueran and Yan Geling and all these great writers. If you just wanted to know what was exciting in Chinese literature and translation, you could do worse than to just read like the last 5 books he's translated.
Yeah, I think when I first saw his name pop up and looked at the list of books he was credited translating, they were interesting, but it was I don't remember the list of books he'd done having a particular theme. Like he'd done a slightly obscure sci-fi one for Amazon Crossing. He'd done the Jackie Chan autobiography. But now he's got a list of translations that's just amazing. And it's, all sorts of pretty cool books that seem to have had quite good marketing. So yeah, for sure.
I personally, I don't really see much of a trend, but I think that's part of the beauty of it. Like the books that have been translated, let's say since 2000, are still evergreen. So it doesn't matter if you read them within 12 months of when they were published, or, when we think of some of these books that the Chinese version was published a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and then the English version comes out, and yet there's still themes that we can discuss or things to think about. So it could be partially that I'm not reading quite as much as some of the other people in this call, but it's I think it's really cool how there's some stuff that comes from mainland China, there's stuff from other parts of China, there's young people, old people. I think we're starting to just get a really eclectic mix. Like couldn't really put it all into one box or even plot them onto a graph and be like, see a trend. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah, that seems about right. I haven't struggled I haven't felt trapped in one particular style of book. I was worried I might end up trapped in like sort of dissident or dissident-esque style books, and they're certainly there, and nothing wrong with them being there. But yeah, it's far from just one type of book. And I guess that I've become more aware of that as I've learned more about what's out there. It's not so there's that, and probably going hand in hand with that is the fact that, like you said, Michelle, there's an amazing range of stuff that's reaching bookshops, or even if it doesn't reach bookshop shelves, it's available for purchase online, one way or the other. And I think what Daniel said about history books being more available, that definitely seems true. Like anytime in a UK bookshop, I decide to switch on China Book Brain, if the fiction shelves yield nothing, there'll be something in the history section, even if it's not that interesting. There's always something, and it'll be a fairly sizable chunk. It will like put to shame the Vietnam section easily. I don't know if there's any other. I
would like to.
Oh, please.
Yeah. When it comes to trends, I can speak a little bit to the education side of things because I think, well, I'm a lecturer at a university, and so I teach Chinese literature, and I am also of the generation that, like, the relatively younger generation of students of Chinese literature, right? And I think I'm right there in that point where what we're seeing right now is a shift from your traditional modern authors, which seems like a little bit of a paradox to say, but people like Lu Xun and Yu Dafu and whatnot, and now into contemporary literature, especially with genre fiction becoming popular, web novels becoming popular. And I think as an educator, we have to start asking ourselves, I know I have started asking myself, where do I put my focus? What is important for the students? Because in the past, as scholars have talked about, scholars of Chinese literature have talked about for a long time, Chinese literature and Chinese history go hand in hand. But is that the case now in 2023 or 2024, whatever year we're in, in the 21st century? Is that the case anymore? I think that students don't really have the same paucity of knowledge that like maybe my generation or older generations had when they were in university. I think they can access more information about China as a whole and different aspects of China as a whole. And in fact, what I see is that they come to Chinese studies from different aspects. Some are more interested in like music or pop culture. Some are more interested in the language. Some are more interested in this, that, or the other. And I think their choices of reading reflect that as well. So yeah, I think I think this podcast, what it also helped to do was sort of broaden the scope for anybody, for let's say scholars, for people who are learning Chinese literature, students, as well as the broader public. And now we can really go and see, we can choose our literature based off of our interests. It doesn't have to just be like Chinese in a big way, just kind of like what you said with regional literature becoming more, let's say, obvious or in the mix now.
I think if you were putting a web novel on a curriculum, you would need to pick some excerpts because those things are multiple times the size of the Bible usually.
Yeah, well, actually, this past semester I had a class. I only have 2 students in this class, but it's a translation class. And I have a week where they can do some sort of multimedia project. And they chose a web novel to translate together. And it was just an episode in the web novel. And I thought they did an excellent job. But as I was talking to them about it, I found out, and I didn't know this before, that they actually just read these on a normal everyday basis. It's part of their go to sleep routine. They'll just put on a little web novel. It can be from China, it can be from anywhere, and they just kind of scroll through right before bed. And I'm like, oh, that's totally different from me. So obviously there's a generational gap there. But I just thought that was really interesting. And they know a lot more about the fan translations, the kind of collective translations that happen, I think even more than a lot of the scholars out there know. So it's exciting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's a few people who are immersed in that world that follow the show on social media or whatever and don't have locked accounts, which gives me the opportunity to spy on not spy, have a nosy through all the stuff about web novels and that they post. And a thing that strikes me is how divorced it is from, or how little baggage there is from anything outside the web novel. So if it's, say, hypothetically, a young Italian woman who's really into boy love stories set in some fantastical Chinese dynasty, everything they post about will be about either the stories or drama among the fans of the stories. So no one's beating each other up over whether or not the Republic of China was reactionary or who is the figurehead of Chinese literature. It's really just about consuming the stuff, and the fact it's from a real place in time and history isn't such an issue. And the fact, I don't know, it also feels like it could be much more fluid with other web novel genres. I don't know, like fan fiction for Harry Potter or something. It feels like it's much more in that world than any of the stuff we really talk about on the show. And it's not really a world I want to live in, but it's kind of nice in a way that it's so much just about enjoying the stuff you're reading and talking about it with strangers all over the world.
For sure. No, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Does anyone else have a thing they want to underline, or I can take it to the next?
I want to share this is what I'm working on right now, because I work as a copyright consultant with another frontier of Chinese literature writing. I noticed that translation, actually the demand happened long before it becomes a book. So I work with this organization based in Hong Kong. They sponsor journalists to write in Chinese on long fiction stories, and most of them are, it's sort of a diaspora narrative. Most of them are not allowed to return to China. So, and then there's a Chinese community everywhere now. I mean, most of them, so most of stories, there's a Chinese story everywhere, and most of it is about money. It's about money all the time. So that's where it's very interesting. And there's a demand from the filmmaking side to directly license the story once they're published online. So that's actually what I was working on today. to finalize sort of long form. So and then there's constantly demand for translation from the story to English. Somehow, like people always are looking for translators. And I'm like, yeah, I know a lot of people, but I don't know if they want to do it. And they're like, well, we pay, but like, it's not about that. They might not have the time or they don't want to do it. Yeah, so this is like our tiny little world of bilingual people. It's somehow it's very hard for people to understand why don't you do it for money, but I'm like, there's no money in it. So the same thing for licensing stories, like the amount of licensing fee is so small. I'm shocked that they would bother to license at all. And so I think the value of a story is because it's real. It feels fictional, but they want it to be real, and that's what people are looking for. So I think people outside of China are interested in Chinese stories, but there's another universe full of the Chinese story that's going on right now in the entire world, and I think it's fascinating, and we should keep following it.
I've had a bit of a window into stories being told and then, what's the word, exported as films, again through social media. On my podcast Instagram account I follow, and I'm followed by people that I don't know if they do anything with literature, but they do a lot of stuff with Chinese cinema, and it's striking, like in the UK or in America, how often smaller Chinese language films are getting screened and discussed
Yes.
and disseminated about some quite interesting topics. Like there was one about, what was it? I think a Uyghur taxi driver with a Han passenger, or maybe vice versa, and that's the whole film. And that did get released in China, and then I checked back in a few months later, and it was like gone, or the author had to, not the author, sorry, the director had to get out of the country or something. But yeah, you're right. There's all these
there's
dimensions.
always also directors. Well, I also do O1 visa for people, so I can tell you who my clients are, but the short films from China, especially from people who move outside, to outside of China, are so interesting. And the movies that gets produced in China are so boring. In comparison. I mean, it's boring in a fun way, because then you see where the policy is going. They're not allowed to say anything anymore. And then all the movies published outside, you've never heard of, are so interesting. I think I think all the writing would go to film production much faster than before. And it's because it's easier to sell, and that's what people are used to. So I think like maybe the good writer, at least a lot of the good writers are also filmmakers now. And I think that's interesting.
Actually, sorry, do you mind if I just jump in there? I think
you're a little quiet, Daniel. Are you able to be
Sorry.
closer to your microphone?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Daniel.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, one of the interesting trends that we've noticed on the trade side here in publishing is that, so not 出版社, not like mainland 出版社, not like publishing, but mainland 文化公司, the cultural companies, actually setting up subsidiaries in both Anglophone, in Anglophone countries. I'm not sure if it's happening in the rest of Europe or not, but definitely in Anglophone countries, in America, here in the UK. So, for example, Astra has something, I forget who Fast Express behind them back in Russia. And then recently, something Hailang recently set up here in London. And yeah, like this trend of kind of Chinese publishers moving up the value chain, I suspect with twofold. One is kind of integrating into like IP creation side, because the majority of their revenue comes from selling translated editions in China. If they control more of that value chain, they'll be it'll be a method for them to grow and deploy their capital in a way that like basically doesn't it doesn't hit their caps inside China. Said differently, it's also interesting that they most likely will do a certain amount of like getting Chinese rights out into the international media space, which would be interesting. And yeah, that's just like something that is an interesting big development that we've been keeping. I'm not sure if anyone's heard anything from that from my end.
Thanks, Daniel. I love moving up the value chain. It's one of my favorite ways to pass the time. What you were saying about, was it Wenhua Gongsu Culture Company, something like that?
Yeah, Wenhua Gongsu. So they're not
Right.
official too much. They don't have the official right to publish in China, but they do publish.
So
they do everything except publish.
I think I first saw that term looking at Chinese sci-fi, and I think possibly one of the past guests discussed it. Maybe, if not Emily Jin, then someone a bit like Emily Jin, someone about her age with an interest in Chinese sci-fi. A lot of these companies, well, I know that several companies like that have popped up in China. I guess people who are fans of Chinese sci-fi are involved, and presumably they have investors or backers, and I think they are being created to promote films or get films off the ground, but then maybe also publish written stories in print or online, and probably video games are another angle as well. I haven't really followed that stuff as closely for quite a while, but I've heard about these cultural companies in the context of Chinese sci-fi. I remember hearing about that around the same time the Chinese Film Board branch of the government put out some guidelines or suggestions or something about what they wanted Chinese sci-fi productions to do. I don't know what their rationale was, if it was this, they didn't want more cock-ups like the attempt at making a three-body movie, or if it was more ambitious than just avoiding problems, or whether it was about taking control. I don't know, but yeah, that's where I'd heard that term before. But it's interesting that it's not restricted to sci-fi.
That'd be a non-fiction book. What was the behind the scenes of getting the 3-body movie made? That'd be an interesting non-fiction.
Could you say that a bit louder? Didn't really hear you.
Sorry. It'll be an interesting non-fiction book to read about basically how the 3-body problem got made in China.
I think that's a state secret. I don't think we're ever going to get the story, unless I can get the right person on the show. I have an exciting next bullet point, but does anyone have more to throw in? Okay,
I just want to say hi,
Yes.
and because I'm leaving, so I'm sorry that I can't stay beyond an hour, but it's really great to see you, Angus, and everybody, and to hear about the trends. Oh, I'm Fiona, by the way, and thank you once again. I think everybody has thanked you, but I do want to thank you for your generosity and your time, and I thought someone must be really crazy to do this,
Never said I wasn't.
Well, the next time maybe you're going to restart your podcast with your dog, and that would be quite sci-fi, I thought.
She is a smart dog.
What?
She is a very smart dog.
Oh, it doesn't matter as long as the dog can bark. That would be good, Anyhow, it's really great to see faces here and to hear about a little bit about everyone's projects and how everyone feels about translated Chinese fiction. We never exactly know that Chinese translations can sell or not, so it's just good to know that people are reading them. So thanks again, Angus, for creating this platform for everyone, for us all to talk about something related to the translated Chinese fiction. So have a nice retirement. Do we say that, or a break?
Yeah, you can say that. Wish I could retire.
Right. Thank you again. Thank you, everybody. Fiona. Have a wonderful time.
You too.
Bye.
Yeah, I guess I'll take it to the next one then, because we've already been going an hour. It's if you haven't do you have an absolutely favorite genre that you will defend to the death, that you're willing to say is better than the other genres that at least are out there in Chinese lit? But of course, genres aren't really restricted to languages, so it's a bit of a questionable question. But like for me, it's easily Chinese sci-fi, and at least reform literature. That was who was our guy that I talked to, Christopher.
Christopher Payne, I believe. Yeah.
Christopher Payne. What was Empires of Dust? What was the author?
Jiang Zilong.
Jiang Zilong.
Yes.
Yeah. You wouldn't really defend that to the death, would you? Apart from as a marketer.
I think I'm the only person in the entire industry who's like that.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed that, but it's I guess it's subjective taste and how you got brought up. Very much it puts, like, it's one of those books that kind of really put into a lot of missing pieces in my life where I lack context to understand certain things. And it's one of those books where it was presented to me in such a way where it's like, oh, okay, so that's what my parents were talking about when they were talking about this. And the other thing it did for me was really kind of explain to me what those loud choo-choos are coming from when they get really angry at a people. Because basically it's a book about those kind of people, right? I mean, sorry, I might completely just not do it.
It's just you're slightly quiet. I'm struggling to hear.
Apologies. Yeah, the thing that the book did two things for me. One is give me context in to events that my parents talked about.
Oh, right.
When family gatherings and whatnot. It's the book for that, right? And the second thing that it really did for me is kind of explain to me what the loud shoo-shoos are coming from when they get really drunk about it.
Right.
And start ranting about events. You know, it's basically the book that explains where those people came from, right?
Right. What I couldn't grasp about the reform literature, about fiction about economic reform and opening, is like whether that's like a one-man genre. If Jiang Zolong's the only guy that wrote this stuff and everything else is just sort of, what's the word? Tangentially similar, like it's about the changes in the 80s. But that's one where I have no idea because I don't have sufficient reading skills to really read books in Chinese or have a very good time searching the internet, browsing the internet in Chinese. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really expect anyone else to defend reform literature to the death, apart from maybe Jiang Zolong himself.
Yeah, I wrote a review of that book when it came out. I can't remember where, China Channel or some other website that's gone already. The thing with that book is it was such a massive phenomenon when it came out that it's kind of hard to look back 40 years and kind of understand what it meant. But it was this massive bestseller and something that everyone was talking about and everybody wanted to read. And it was a sort of bridge between the socialist realist style or revolutionary romanticism and a new style that was possible in the 1980s. So sort of still using the same old style, but talking about the greatness of reform. And he's a good writer. He's sort of heavy-handed with his metaphors and whatnot. Yeah, I would defend it to the death. What the heck? Yeah.
Are there other guys who wrote stuff that is called reform literature? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean there was a ton of it. If you look at like Jia Pinghua started as basically writing reform literature. He was basically his first publications were in the late 1970s, and in all the magazines that were coming out in the 1970s, there's what we got in English was a lot of like avant-garde literature of the 1980s, when there was just a ton of people who are much more similar to Jiang Zilong than they were to all the writers that sort of made a name, who sort of became Mo Yan and Yan Lianke. For every Mo Yan, there was like 100 people grinding away in a provincial literary magazine, writing sort of in the same style, like stories with like the political commissar comes up with a new plan to maximize profits at the factory. That's the title of the story. People writing those kind of stories, not all as terrible as I make it sound there. Some are sort of bridging the gap between the avant-garde and the reform literature. But yeah, there's a ton of reform literature, and we'll probably never see it in English, and nobody really reads it in Chinese anymore, except for Jiang Zelong. And yeah.
Okay, I feel a little bit more enlightened about that. Does anyone else want to stick their neck out for a particular genre? Michelle?
I will fight to the death for crime fiction. It's not high literature, but I also think that's the exact reason why it's a wonderful gateway for people who otherwise would not pick up a Chinese book. And, there isn't that much out there yet, but when you think how Second Sister did and how that book was able to kind of really be exciting and be distinctly Chinese, but at the same time be so accessible even to someone who had never been to Hong Kong before, you think, oh, this is wonderful. How could you not love this genre? That's the one I'm fighting for.
Yeah, that's really the at least from a sales point of view, you want to find the people that aren't looking for stuff that's Chinese, that are looking for it as an extra item on their crime shelf, not their China shelf, because they must just be far vaster in numbers. 1% of them is going to get you a lot more money than 1% of people like us. I guess that's the formula. I don't know what would be considered the most successful translated Chinese crime book. I guess it could be that. He's certainly very slickly published. Do you know if it did really, really well? One assumes so. Well, Dylan's popped something in the chat. Is that about? Oh, it's about reform literature again. Do you want to read that, Dylan?
Sure. Yeah, it's from the review. It's just talking about there are extended lectures embedded throughout, delivered by cadres, peasants, and policemen, and lengthy quotations from official documents, including one from the Chinese Academy of Sciences on Great Leap Forward, food substitutes, that includes basic instructions on processing corn and wheat roots into food. If that doesn't make great literature, what does?
That's sarcasm. I read that as sarcasm.
No, I mean, no. It to some extent it is, but I mean, like, to go back to Jia Pinghua does the same thing with including these lengthy, like, in this book we translated, me and Nikki, there's a large section which is like 20 pages on how to reclaim land, sandy soil and whatnot. So I have a lot of tolerance for that kind of thing and find it pretty fascinating.
I guess it's the spirit of the times, in a way. On that note, this isn't translated at all, but again, like, reading something to learn what was going on in the person's head rather than to, like, for pleasure. There's a book by Han Su-yin that I picked up in a secondhand bookshop. I just wrote a review of it recently that got published, but it's called China in the Year 2001. It's an old Pelican book, and it basically reads as, I guess Han Su-yin at a certain point decided she was going to switch from writing semi-autobiographical fiction to throwing her lot in with, like, Maoism, basically, and doing PR for it in the West. So it's like it says China in the year 2001, and I thought, oh, sci-fi, she's going to predict the Chinese future. But it's not that. It's basically just a description of, like, the revolution, the foundations of the revolution, and then the establishment of Mao's China, and then from then on how great it is, and how it's so good at going it alone. And there's 200, just under 250 pages of it, and it's an amazing document of its time, because she wrote this just a couple years before Nixon and the gang visited China, and obviously just a few years before, less than a decade before Reform and Opening kicked off. So everything she's saying is about to be, like, undone or complicated, because there's quite a lot near the end where she's saying that it looks like the USSR and the USA are going to become best buddies, and that Mao's China is going to finally assume its destiny as the leader of all the oppressed countries in the world. And it doesn't sell anymore because no one really wants to read that. It's not relevant. But as a reading experience, it's an amazing journey back in time into, like, at the very least, one person's head, which is I guess the magic of books. So another reason for reading extended lectures about dry topics, because it reveals something about the person giving the lecture and their situation. I don't think I'd defend it to the death, though. Probably I'd defend Chinese sci-fi. Scarlett, would you defend sci-fi to the death?
Sure, I would. Actually, I felt so embarrassed. Like, actually, I really like true stories. But like doing sci-fi for this many years, they really broadened my horizon to see different angles of the world, which might be more interesting. Say, yeah, I feel like okay, it's my responsibility to represent sci-fi.
What are the two stories you really like?
The true stories.
You said there was two stories, right?
Oh,
Or
sorry, I
did you
said
mean nonfiction?
yeah, nonfiction.
Oh,
Got
right. Sorry,
it.
true stories. Gotcha.
Thank you.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like I've thrown my lot in with Chinese sci-fi, but
Yeah.
quite a lot of the short stories I've read, I'm not mad about. It's really a small handful that are some of the in my opinion, some of the very best things I've ever read. But I also feel like if someone asks me about Chinese sci-fi, I'm gonna, like, not say anything dismissive about the short stories I didn't like and fly the banner for the whole thing. What of the big ones we've not mentioned yet? Are any of you huge wuxia fans? No. Nadia? Or was that a no?
I am. I grew
Right.
up reading all Jin Yong books, just because they are like the only not serious books allowed. It's just so can be it's very long. And my your uncle or your father must have a whole set, and there are TV shows and movies all about it. And then I was very into the kung fu wuxia movies. I thought about it. I listened to your wuxia episode and your comparison to the wuxia idea of, with the sci-fi. They're both very philosophical. Wuxia is in particular very East Asian. And I think for a long time, wuxia novels are the only source of probably for people to learn about relationships. And it's not depicted in any other types of serious writing except for Hong Mo, and that's not quite normal. But I don't know how to translate the whole idea of wuxia. It's like you have to grow up in this culture, and I actually translate for a lot of gangster movies. Like I translate. Like they came to me because they don't understand this accent from East London. I'm like, I'm not okay, I'll try. But sort of like put something there. And I also translate Taiwanese gangster movies into English. I would defend the language. I would defend vulgar and obscene language. I translate a book about Ulysses. It's called The Most Dangerous Book, about how Ulysses gets banned and gets published after a series of lawsuits. So I would defend all language, and I spend so much time on Bilibili watching young people talk. Like, I don't understand what they're saying. A lot of words are banned already, and they use codes.
Right.
And these codes for me is very science fiction. It's so I think that science fiction and non-fiction writing they look like they're at the far end of the spectrum, but they're like in essence they're the same. Like you see the most truth in Chinese science fiction, but it's like, you know, a very sophisticated consolidation of all the truths that they want, put it into a structure where maybe nonfiction and the Bilibili comments are the raw material, and they're all very fascinating to me.
Even without government censorship, I've found sometimes I'll think about saying something to my girlfriend, but I'll be using slightly online terminology, and she's much mentally more healthy than me. Doesn't spend nearly as much time on internet comments.
You're like,
So
what?
she'll be like, what did you say? But the one she does know that she thinks is quite funny, and I agree, it's because some of the social media platforms will block your comments or even block you if you say like kill or killed or even suicide. The word people use, I guess especially the younger generation uses, unalive. So rather than I'm going to kill you, it's I'm going to unalive you for saying that. So yeah, I guess it's happening right now everywhere. But I bet on Bilibili it's that bit more like a code, a full-on code. Especially with the Bilibili bullet comments flying across the screen, that's got to be even more sci-fi.
But now I can't watch a clean video anymore. I feel lonely. Like I need the bullet comments. Yeah.
I hope someone does that for YouTube. I would really like that.
A crazy mess.
Yeah. Jenna, is there any style of book you'd defend to the death?
I think instead of genre, it's more like you said, style that I would defend. It's the surreal and the strange, because I feel like the style itself actually breaks a lot of literary convention, like fragments or different experimental ways of storytelling all comes from the surreal and the strange, or a stream of consciousness. There's so many stories I read from China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, that's like strange stories. And I used to have this roundtable at Alta where we talk about translating strange and surreal stories or any other genres. And at that time, there were a couple of stories that are really, really strange, like some naked people dancing around, holding hands. Like the participants were submitting a lot of those things. And I don't know why I'm like especially drawn to this style. It's just like there's so many things that's unpredictable. And there are some plots, sometimes historical, depending on the nature of the work. Sometimes it's easy to guess, sometimes it's accessible, but I feel like for surreal and strange stories, I can never predict what's coming next. And I liked the sense of surprise of something taken over, something I just couldn't imagine before that story was being written. So I would totally say this is the kind of style I would defend to death. And sometimes this and surreal elements comes from the language itself, like the more underrepresented languages. The dialects is never written, or the records that was kept since a long time ago. Those things are super fascinating for me.
I definitely think it's sort of like a extra invisible genre in a way, the weird. I've categorized episodes on my show with tag function on the different places I posted them. So right now, the show's homepage is on WordPress, and you can tag, pardon me, you can tag your posts into different categories, and each post can be in multiple different ones. So if it covers more than one genre, you can take more than one box. Or like if it's a short story, if it's a horror short story, take horror, take short story, and so on. But I made one called The Weird and the Eerie. And just scrolling down it, there's like a literary one that would qualify, I think, as weird, a sci-fi, a fantasy, a crime, another sci-fi, another literary one, sci-fi. So like there's a whole mixture that I think for me I would file under the weird. And I think sometimes it's because there's something in the story that's kind of haunting or never quite adds up. And other times it's just literally in the language itself. It's a perfectly normal series of events, but I guess the writer used language in a beguiling way, and then the translator managed to preserve that weird quality. Although, and I guess on the flip side, you have stories that aren't intended to be weird, but the translator has done a really bizarre translation, and then they maybe produce something that isn't technically great, but in English will throw up all these weird phrases that are accidentally very interesting. I'm sure I've come across a few like that where I'm like, what? Why did the author say this? And then I have to remind myself the author didn't say that. The translator just picked some odd, convoluted words. But yeah, I totally agree. If I was going to defend something to the death, it might be the weird, but I think sometimes that's something that you, the reader, assign rather than it's something that was ever in the author's head. Like I think the book we talked about, Jenna, Fang Siqi's First Love Paradise, there was definitely some like weird, uncanny elements to that, but it's not what I would have wanted to focus on talking about the book because it's such a serious emotional subject matter. But like if you're looking at it just for the experience as a reader and the aesthetics, it's very unusual, that book, I think.
Yeah, and I like some of those like strange stories like blending into horror, and sometimes those horrors blending into metaphors that reflect our contemporary society and things that and topics people have been talking about. And I noticed a lot of queer stories have been going through like strange and surreal elements. They always start from places we don't really expect. It could start from an animal's perspective or any other perspectives that's sort of unconventional. And I find that there's a lot of potential for creativity and things that just always surprise me.
For sure. I think I haven't quizzed Haida or Peter about this one. Do you have a genre you want to stick your necks out for? If not, that is okay. I can take it to the next topic.
I think I would like to say I'm coming from the perspective of what still deserves translation, and I think I'm going to have to just fall back on academia and say that modern literature and especially colonial literature still deserve to be translated, and so I'm going to die on that hill. I think the early 20th century especially, there's lots of writing that's very interesting, even if it's not particularly good or well written by our standards today. I still think that it gives us a really interesting lens into the use of language, into the moment that these people were living in. I mean, my research and the things that I translate are mostly from the Manchukuo era, which is like so niche and so distant from all of us, and it's, you know, it's so weird, but at the same time it's exciting to read these texts and trying to understand why these writers would say one thing, but you know they mean another thing, and to learn how to read between the lines, whether it's in translation or in the original, I think is an important skill. But it's also a really interesting and useful thing that we need to keep our brains fresh and active. So I think modern literature and especially colonial literature, that's what I would defend. Yep.
Yeah, some of the most interesting stuff I've read for the show has come out from academic presses, and maybe I wish that they could. Oh, bye, Jenna. See ya. Even if I wish that they could be more commercial, just so they have more reach, like stuff I've read's been fantastic. Like I was introduced by one of the guys from the what's it called, Reading the Stone, the podcast devoted to Dream of the Red Chamber, Hong Mong, to Mu Shiying, who was this seemingly quite evil guy in his real life, who wrote this like decadent literature all about like the pleasures of bougie Shanghai and how people's psychology gets mixed up with the party lifestyle, but also technology. That's so up my alley. But it seems like if you want to find that stuff in English, as far as I can tell, it's all via academic presses or just PDFs online on some university's server. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are books you can order on Amazon. that have
Oh,
wuxia
there are
yin.
lots of books available, but
Right.
another thing that another reason why I would defend this as well is because I lived in China for a long time, and I found myself really relating to these characters who had been born and raised in China and then go and live in Japan for a long time, and they're, experiencing this traumatic awakening and that self-learning, but also this self-loathing, and there's a lot of thoughts and emotions going on there. Just that experience of being a foreigner living in a foreign country, that's actually not it's funny how that's not really a genre, but it is a common experience in literature. And so I think, yeah, it that type of stuff still deserves to be read, still deserves to be translated, and translated well, and published and marketed well, not just for academics and not just for students, obviously, but for the broader public.
Just a few days ago, I was proofreading an article by a Chinese academic writing in English, and it's about Lu Xun and how one of his stories was inspired by a Japanese story that was in turn inspired by Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther. So the Chinese story was
That's a really good article as well. I love that article.
yeah,
I think I
but
know which one you're talking
this one's
about.
not published yet. So
Oh, okay. I've read a different one. It's very good.
right. The Lu Xun story is called Regret for the Past, but like it was mentioning how Lu Xun had to learn German because some of the medicine the lessons he was going to at medical school were all in German, fluent German in Japan by a Chinese obtained by a Chinese student. And the relevance to literature was his learning German meant he could read stuff translated from other European languages, minor languages by weak countries, say like Hungary, for example, translated into German that he would read, or possibly even from German, then into Japanese, then into Chinese. And it's hard to imagine anything like that happening in the 2020s. I guess there are still bridge translations. But like as interesting as it would be for me to be a fly on the wall in Lu Xun's life in Hongkou district, Shanghai, I'd probably be more interested to see what was he up to in Japan. Just follow Lu Xun around over the shoulder for a day in Tokyo or wherever it was in Japan. That would be amazing. Dylan said, shout out to you, Dafu, who I love, with the most traumatic Japan experience in Chinese literature. What happened to him? I don't know that one.
Well, he writes these. I mean, he's sort of a lot like a lot of these guys. They arrived in Japan thinking it was this great, modern, forward-thinking, advanced place, and there was sort of a lot of self-loathing that they felt and they wrote about. And he writes about his sort of lustful gaze on Japanese women and his erotic defeat at their hands, sort of as a metaphor for his experience as sort of somebody coming from a lesser country, a lesser culture. It seemed to him, I suppose, at the time, coming to Japan. And his story is fascinating. He ends up dying in Southeast Asia under strange circumstances, potentially working against the Japanese at the time. He's a fascinating figure. He's another person who's writing. It when you come across it now, it seems so modern and fresh, even though it was written 100 years ago now.
Yeah, the story of arriving somewhere and being disappointed is very interesting to me. Possibly because I left China 2018, came back to UK 2018. Maybe things have evened out since then, but that was a tremendously disappointing reverse culture shock experience for me. Scarlett is bigging up Qian Zhongshu's Fortress Besieged. Still not read that. I've read one of his books now.
Is it translated? Who translated it?
I don't know who translated it, but it's out via Penguin. I saw that one, the translation, on sale in Shanghai, in Thamestown, the fake British town. There was a bookshop that had a small number of translated English books, and I remember
Yeah.
Fortress Besieged being there because it had such a cool title and a memorable cover.
I think, yeah, I've introduced a British friend, so he bought it on Amazon, so I'm sure it's been translated.
Oh, it's definitely available, yeah.
Mm.
Why would you defend that one to the death?
Oh, I mean, for the Chinese people's experience in a foreign country.
Mm.
So the main character, he was either in America or in Britain. So, and then he didn't actually finish the degree, but he faked a name and made that publish in a Chinese newspaper. He said he was in Clarendon University or something like that. Yeah. So which is still similar like what we're doing now. Still there's 野鸡大学 for Chinese people to go to in the foreign countries. And yeah, I'm quite surprised reading that after 100 years, the people studying abroad and come back, the life hasn't changed much, really.
Yeah, when I went back to the UK post Brexit, I thought I'm not going to hear many Mandarin speakers anymore if I'm near university. Why would people want to come to Brexit Britain? But they still have. And after COVID, I thought, okay, for one reason or the other, maybe that we won't hear so many overseas students coming to study in the UK. But I work on a university campus now, and yeah, every day I'll hear at least some Mandarin passing me on the street, and a whole load of I think we'll put it like this: new shops that have Chinese signs as big as their English, and it's simplified Chinese, have just opened up opposite my workplace. There's one that appears to be both rice noodles and bubble tea. I can't really work out if I'm going to get hot food if I go in there. And then there's a place, it's the most confusing. It's got like 3 titles. It says Mr. Egg, and then it has a big friendly looking egg. Then it says in English like kebabs, wraps, something. But then like the Chinese writing describes totally different foods. So I have no idea what Mr. Egg sells. I don't think it's egg oriented. And
Live
then
search engine optimization, like optimization for the human that can read the certain text.
yes. And then I'm sure there's a third one there as well. Yeah, and Nadia's asked how many bubble tea places. Yeah, I noticed actually when I came back to the UK, Manchester had more bubble tea and milk tea Chinese style places, not only in Chinatown, at the Manchester Chinatown, but some other places. And yeah, now there's even more. And it seems to be, at least in Manchester, popular with British Muslims because it's not alcoholic and it's more of a, you don't have to sit down. It's a what do you call it? A takeaway, buy your drink and go. So it's not like a Costa or a Starbucks where you sit down and get stuck there for ages. So yeah, I often see British Muslims outside the bubble tea places in Manchester. But in Warsaw. Oh. All right, interesting. Does Warsaw have a Chinatown?
No, it does not. It has a kind of like a shopping center slash small city outside of Warsaw, but it's like it's not historical. It's like very new, like 30 years ago it all started. So there's no classic in a London sense. For instance, sense of a word, Chinatown in Warsaw. Vietnamese is a far bigger community. I mean, used to be in Poland.
Interesting. Scarlett said,
I think it's not a regular Chinatown community business. It's more, first things first, bubble tea is from Taiwan, and I grew up not drinking it because it's too sugary. And somehow the expansion of the bubble tea empire goes with the Chinese student because they have to have one every day. And then all the people who graduated from the Chinese student who graduated didn't know what to do, they'd be like, I want to run a business. And the first thing they would think of is a bubble tea shop. That's why like we have like 200 bubble tea shops in New York right now, but half of them are getting close to bankruptcy. But it's everywhere. I'm really shocked. People, like younger people, don't drink coffee anymore. They don't meet for coffee. They would, well, the bubble tea is the new coffee now.
My first experience of it was as an undergraduate, also in Manchester, just over a decade ago. I was a student here, and I've come back in recent years, and I had it in a sushi conveyor belt place. So I didn't even know it would had that, Taiwan, China connection. I just associated it vaguely with East Asia. Couldn't have told you if it was Japanese or not. And fast forward 10 years, it's definitely different in Manchester now.
Yeah, I think the franchise is basically because there's a huge market. Otherwise, it's not such the margin's very small, and it's a culture phenomena for me. Yes. Wait, why are we talking about bubble tea again? No, no, it's
we were talking about
I wanted to ask
students.
you that question. Yeah, I think I typed at the same time and you mentioned it at the same time simultaneously. So it's definitely an indicator.
Definitely in Manchester, there's the Chinatown in the dead center. Then around the universities, there are other Chinese one-way or other shops that I guess are serving the students. And then I think it's just a scattering of other things nearby. Like I'm in one of Manchester's larger towns that are part of Greater Manchester, and the Asian supermarket near us is actually Southeast Asian. I think it's maybe owned by Philippine people. So they have frozen dumplings in there. They have big bags of rice. But if I'm trying to do Chinese cooking, much easier to go in the center. But yeah, I don't know if that's long-standing or if that's recent as well. Anyway, we've veered very far from literature. Does anyone else have any special books they want to fly the flag for? Or next bullet point, is there any I didn't cover on the show that is in these 100 episodes, or rather these 99 episodes that deserved it?
Oh, sorry.
No,
Okay.
no, you. I've already talked.
Yeah, okay. I think that's what I would like to say, like covers both of these questions, the last one that you had and the new one. Well, I don't have my favorite genres, but I have obviously my favorites, and many of them have one thing in common. Every time Chinese authors like move away from the countryside, or this opposite between the city and the countryside, and they focus on depicting the city life, it feels very refreshing to me. Just to name Cocoon, or Novel of Chengdu, or Murong Xuecun, or slightly decadent tone of Annie Baobei, and so on and so on. And Northern Girls by Shen Kei, and I think the Shen Kei is I mean, not to be nagging, but if you were to come back at some point, then I think that this offer is definitely worth catching up with. And Northern Girls is a kind of a book that could be on this list.
Yeah, Shanghai is on the list, and one, I guess it's maybe not such a big deal anymore, but it seemed to come a lot when I was looking for stuff that was translated from Chinese and got a bit of fanfare at the time, was Shanghai Baby. It seemed like that was a big deal at the time. I'd like to read it. Maybe it wouldn't seem quite so hip if I was to read it now, but I'm guessing there's a lot of secondhand copies of that one floating around. Yeah, there's definitely lots of books I've thought at one point I would like to do on the show, and then they're an entire book, so I never commit to reading them or buying them. There's also a lot of books on my translated Chinese, my translated Chinese bookshelf that I've not read, because occasionally I've been taking a break and reading something not translated from Chinese. But yeah, there's still even more on the shelf.
My contribution would be Zhu Tianwen. I think she's the greatest writer writing in Chinese. She's probably more famous in the West for her collaborations with Hu Xiaoxian, but she wrote a book called Notes of a Desolate Man,
Oh yeah,
which was translated by Howard Goldblatt, and also another collection called Fin de siècle Splendor, 世纪末的华丽, which has sort of been translated in bits and pieces along the way, but I think she's great, and I wish more people would read her.
definitely. If I resurrect the show, I'd be doing more short stories and less novels, just as a time saver. So yeah, the Fin de siècle one might be a go-to.
And from something that I proofread recently, I think if you stick to short stories, you're more likely to get a diverse type of author, because there's only a certain kind of person who can devote that amount of time to a longer novel,
Tell me about it.
right? But the short stories gets covered by more women writers, more writers of different backgrounds, or people who just can devote a tiny bit of time to writing and then also do some other things in their lives.
Yeah, I didn't cast this shade earlier. I might have on other episodes of the show, but I found it notable that some of the podcasts that I like the most that have very meaty episodes, but are also doing a regular posting schedule, are run by academics. And I think it's because they're able to do it in their work hours, because don't tell any of my employers, but when I've been able to pump episodes out, it's because my work is quiet and I can do the editing in my work hours. And yeah, we can't all be academics. No shade on academics, by the way. I'm sure some are busier than others. But yeah, if you're committed to a working job, or looking after children, or commuting, then a novel is going to be that much harder to pump out for sure. Right. I guess I can move it to the very. Oh, please.
Can I add?
You're going to strike
this
back.
I was gonna propose to you at some point, but didn't ever really get the chance. Anyway, it's again leaning with that modern stuff that I was talking about before, but radio plays, and I feel like your podcast would have lended itself to something like radio plays. It would have been fun, for example, to get a few people together, like in a couple of your past episodes, and do kind of just read through the script. These are things that are very difficult to get published, I think, but they do exist, and they are kind of to translate. They're a nice intersection between fiction and drama, and of course, radio/podcast. So I think it would have. I have one. That's what I was going to propose to you, but I think that could be something that you or someone else, listener maybe, might be interested in it at some point.
That's fascinating. What's out there in translation?
I don't think anything is out there in translation. I mean, like years and years, and I think it's a common experience to get into a taxi in China and hear the driver listening to a radio play. But like the radio play that I translated was one that, well, for a brief time during my PhD, I was trying to find out if there were Chinese radio plays and Korean radio plays written in Manchukuo. And I found Chinese plays, and I could find the script, but the Korean ones, I only found the evidence that they were performed, never found any scripts for them. Well, actually, I did find one script, but I never found any evidence that it was performed. So it was like, you know, but I translated the Chinese one, and so it's like, old, it's old, and it's also a reference to an even older story, so there's all this layered history in it. So again, very niche, and that's what makes it really difficult to put it in print and also put it out into the modern world. But to perform it, it's still quite fun, because you get to do different voices and you get to imagine it in different ways, put sounds if you want to, you know, there's still I feel like we're in a time when podcasts are really booming, and yet we're not really seeing fiction or like, let's say, performed fiction very often. So I thought it would be a fun thing to do at some point.
Sure. I know that there are like audio drama podcasts out there, but from what I gather, about 2/3 of them are people's dramatizations of their Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and I couldn't care less. But I know that there are actual narrative podcasts out there. It would be really interesting to do one for sure. The closest I've come is I did do an audiobook one time. We did Shui Mo's one short story from a collection, and the story was The Woman, the Camels, and the Dolls. So Nikki Harmon translated it, and we had the publisher and one of the actors, or not the actor, I don't even know what the term is for the person that reads the audiobook. The narrator?
Narrator. No,
Yeah.
they narrated that.
Yeah, she is a radio actor, Sarah Lamb. I guess a British Chinese lady. She read the story, and that was, yeah, it was great because you have a trained voice actor there to read a segment of it. But it would be just as fun for some non-professionals to go through a script. And on a side note, I could have done more Shuemo episodes because he has at least one staff member on Twitter who would every few months message me being like, when are we doing more Shuemo? And I was like, I just politely fobbed them off. But like one time she messaged me and said, he's got a new book out. Would you like to cover it on the show? And I said, yeah, maybe I'll have to come back to you. And then a few months later, she's like, okay, so when's the interview happening? And I just ignored it. But yeah, I don't know if I'd go down that road again. It seemed like a very weird world, the Shuemo world. But I would gladly do more audiobooks and more radio when the show starts again. I never considered radio dramas, but I knew I knew from living in China, riding taxis, it seemed like they were big. And then people on the show have like confirmed it since. So that's a huge deal. Don't know when one's ever going to come to the BBC though. Right. I guess the very last question is, and this is literally just seeking praise. Did any of you have a really favorite episode that you want to underline? I don't know if I did really. Probably getting Ken Leo on was a high watermark in terms of celebrities, but
I have a very distinct memory of listening to the Brian Holton water margins episode. I was actually mopping the floor in my old flat at the time, and I was just like laughing hysterically over the Scots being performed. I loved it. It was such a fun episode. Yeah, very memorable.
I think that is a popular one. I at my work there is a monthly newsletter thing that I'm one of the 5 editors in this organization. We're in charge of this thing, and we've tried to spiff it up recently because it was basically a glorified Word document. And at the same time, the organization is trying to do more DEI, diversity. What's the E? Diversity, inclusion, diversity, equality, inclusion.
There you go.
Stuff. And they've launched like a column in this newsletter. Launched as an extravagant verb. We've started a column in this newsletter where someone just talks about their background. And I think they were struggling for volunteers. So the first one was on someone talking about her family's sort of Hindu religion and Diwali and stuff. But then I put myself forward because I'm living in England. It is a England only organization, but I'm from Scotland, and Burns Night was coming up. So I took the January column, and I thought, what can I do to avoid just cliched Burns Scots poetry? I know, I'll end it with I started it by talking about how easy is it to assign a national poet or a writer to a country. So England, really easy. Shakespeare. Scotland, also really easy. Quite easy. Robert Burns. And then China, really depends, I think. Depends who you're going for. Maybe it's Lu Xun, maybe it's Li Bai. I don't know. And then I came back to the Chinese stuff at the end by suggesting that if people wanted to celebrate Scots poetry, they could read some Brian Holton translations of classic Chinese poetry. And hopefully he won't sue me because I put a trilingual poem at the bottom. I put the original Chinese, Brian Holton's plain English translation, Annie Scott's translation, thinking I'm now going to be known as the weirdo in the organization. And maybe I am, but loads of people were messaged me and stuff saying that was very fun. And I said, fab, go listen to the episode with Brian. There's more of that insanity. I don't know how many people did, but does anyone else want to ring a bell for an episode before I shut up shop?
I like the Keith Hayward episode. He's just that was one of the most fun to listen to because he's just a passionate reader and he knows that material so well. I don't really like Chinese sci-fi, but his enthusiasm for it was just infectious, and his take on it was really cool. That was a kind of a standout episode for me.
Yeah, I think what many people like us don't realize is a lot of fans of Three Body are also huge fans of like Power Rangers or Star Wars, never mind Mo Yan. And yeah, I wish I'd had more people like that on. I guess it was maybe a Marmite episode.
In the next incarnation, we'll have to get you regular interns so that they can specifically seek out. Sometimes it's a translator with you, sometimes it's a enthusiastic reader that's with you, and sometimes it's someone in academia who's with you. Because it is great to have the variety. That's why your show is better than any other translated Chinese fiction podcast out there.
Yeah, well, I guess if I do get an intern, I'll be like, okay, devote half your time to harassing Howard Goldblatt till he comes on the show.
Yeah.
And then spend the other half trawling Star Wars forums or wuxiaworld.com. Find the real maniacs that read the stuff nonstop. But yeah, the Keith one, for listeners, if you don't know it, that was the first time we did an episode. I think it's still the only one that's directly on the three body problem, and it is literally one of the weirder episodes I've done. But that's fine because I don't know. I was going to say I don't know if there are other three body podcast episodes like that out there. There probably are, actually, because they probably mostly are sci-fi fans talking about it rather than Chinese lit fans. But yeah, Keith had some very interesting anecdotes that I wouldn't have been able to manufacture, and no AI could have generated. All right, shall I wind it down there?
Yeah, just one more. What I wanted to say. Oh yeah, speaking of variety, I was fascinated by the one you did with Emily about the game.
Yeah.
The 古剑.
Yeah, I bought Gujian 3 for that episode and played it once or twice and never again.
Yeah.
I feel really bad for that. That was quite a lot of money. But it was a good game.
Did you do a live stream of playing that game?
Filmed it.
I think.
Filmed us playing it on our phone, so like a really unprofessional live stream. I don't know if video game streaming is in my future, but it was. I think that was possibly during lockdown. So I don't know. Maybe I was in a slightly mentally deranged state. I thought it would be a good idea to film myself playing a Chinese video game with my phone.
Yeah, it was sad. Yeah, I have another friend of mine. He does something similar, and I wanted to introduce him to you to do an episode, but he didn't reply me ever since. So I couldn't tell you more about that then.
I would definitely dip my toes into that world again. I've noticed so I've been this last year, since my last birthday, my girlfriend gave me Elden Ring, and I still haven't beaten it. It's coming on for a year anniversary since I received Elden Ring, and it's a really hard game, so I've been watching lots of walkthroughs and stuff on YouTube. And when you watch these videos, at least for me, YouTube gives me ads for these like mobile phone anime games, but I've realized at least one of them is, possibly all of them, they look like they're Japanese, but they're made in China. There's one called Honkai Star Rail, and I noticed on Twitter, so there was some list of like big Chinese sci-fi publications of the year, and one of them was Honkai Star Rail. So there's a whole world there that it's fiction, so technically it would qualify for the show. Maybe in another life, I'll find your friend and we could live stream something like that. Some anime girl fighting a sci-fi game made in China on the phone. Why not? Okay, I think I am going to wind it up there. So
I have a final question. No, just this 100 episodes. How long will they stay online? Are you planning
Oh,
to
yeah.
keep them online? Yeah.
No, that's a good question. I'm gonna keep the feed online, so it won't vanish from anyone's podcast apps for the time being. It does cost me, I think £100 to £150 each year to keep the feed up. I'm okay with doing that for a year or two. I might find a way, just thinking long term, I might put them somewhere where it doesn't cost me any money. So I put them all on YouTube. YouTube is free. So at the very least, they'll stay up there, until an asteroid hits the Earth or until YouTube shuts down. I might move them to Patreon, but not have them behind a paywall, because I believe if you do that, you don't have to pay any money to Patreon to host your files, which I think would kill the. Yeah, and you could do that and it would still be available as a feed, like a, what do you call it, RSS feed. So in the long term, I might do that, but for like the next year at least, it'll just stay where it is. And
I think a university library should archive it and keep it as their oral history, collection. They should host it for you.
Yeah, I think
I'll think about it. I'm not the copyright person here. If you
Right.
allow me, I will think about it. I'll ask around
Yeah.
to find a platform to host it for, because 100 episodes sounds like an asset to keep.
Sure.
So
And they're
then,
long episodes.
it should be, yeah.
I'm flattered.
So
I'm flattered, Nadia.
it's something we should keep, and maybe in 200 years, people were wondering what people were doing in our time, and they don't listen to radios anymore. They don't need internet. They just implant a chip into their head, and
Yep.
they know what we're thinking already.
And
I totally second Nadia's suggestion.
yeah, I think at least
archive to host it.
I would hope at
I
least
would
one.
look into the publisher in Taiwan, because there's at least one company that they have money to spend, and desperately looking for something in English that talks about us. Taiwanese people want to be seen. I'll talk to the people there, see how they want it.
Taiwan
how
does
they feel about it. Yeah.
So great.
Yes.
I would hope at least
And I
one.
think after this, I'm gonna go back to listen to episode 1.
And you can
The greatest short story of all time.
episode
right?
1 is just me rambling like a madman. Well, appropriately,
Yeah,
the
it's
diary
a
of
diary
a
of a madman. Yeah,
rambling like a madman.
we all have our version on daily basis. But
Well,
yes,
yeah,
it's a great job. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful journey. It's a great job you did.
I was about to say I might listen through every episode in sequence myself. I would probably get 3 in and then stop. But it's there, so the option, it's there online, the option's always there. And I would hope, you mentioned 200 years in the future, I would hope at least one guest we've had on the show in 200 years from now will have a statue or a public square devoted to them. Probably Nikki Harman or maybe Jeremy Chiang, but you never know.
I don't want to be a statue, just for
Okay.
your information.
Noted. That people in the future, no Nadia Ho statues, please.
Yeah. Yes, that's our message to the future.
Awesome. Does anyone else want to say anything before I wind it up? No. Okay, well, all guests, thank you for making it for about 2 hours, the about 2 hours we've been talking. Listeners, if you made it all the way to this point, thank you for listening. If you lose the feed on your podcast app, Google it. I'm sure the show will be online somewhere. YouTube should be a first port of call. And maybe you're listening so far ahead in the future that I've already brought it back, in which case the point's moot. But thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's it. We're done. You're listening to the final pre-hiatus minutes of the Translated Chinese Fiction podcast now. Sorry for all the drama. Maybe it's not as dramatic for you as it is for me. God knows if it's going to feel weird for me not having this show to come back to every so often, or every week, every few days. I don't know. I've already said thank you all for listening. I'm trying to say something really sincere and emotional. I'm not sure it's coming, But just to say, anytime any of you have said anything nice to me or like to post anything that reached me that showed your appreciation for the show, it meant a lot. And of course, if anytime you downloaded an episode, subscribed to it, that meant a lot too. I've been listening to podcasts since I was a teenager, and I love the feeling of searching for something really specific, like a book I've read, and seeing a podcast episode pop up in the results. It's wonderful to discover a show that you really like. So if you are if you stumbled upon this show and have had something for free, pleasant to accompany while you've been like walking the dog or driving to work, commuting in the subway, maybe riding the subway through let's say Shenyang or Qingdao. I doubt many of you are doing that. Maybe it's more likely to be London or New York or somewhere, or riding the bus through a less famous city. But if the voices in your head on this podcast have brought you enjoyment, I was about to say pleasure, that would be weird. If they brought you enjoyment and made your life nice, I'm happy to have done that. And if, like I said in the intro, but if you ever want to discuss a book, I'm not going anywhere. I'm keeping my internet connection running and might come back to the show one day. We'll see. I would really like to. I certainly not covered all of the interesting books that would qualify for the show. So that's been about 2 minutes of outro. It's probably time for me to stop and say the very last words of the show. So I know we're not producing new episodes, but you can tell your friends, your teachers, your writing buddies, your librarian, your pengyous, a plural of a Mandarin noun, breaking all the rules. Tell your pengyous to listen to the 100 episodes that I've managed to crank out there onto the internet. And of course, 再见.
错抗了风，望不到云和夜，望不到天际，流星刹那一